What we're going to talk about today is in the military's war on sexual assault, is the military creating victims where they otherwise didn't exist? This is becoming an epidemic. This is something that's happening nationwide and worldwide with the military, where they have an accused, and if they have a weak case, they're essentially finding other people and turning them into victims. Now, you may be asking yourself, how does that happen? How does the military create victims where victims don't exist?
Let me tell you, I just got back yesterday from a court-martial of an E-8 out in Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. We had 5 victims. And what started out as a kiss on the breast after a date, it started out as a kind of a sexual harassment type case. OSI digs into the case, and they contact all of the women that my client has ever been married to, and he was married 3 times, and they contacted all of his ex-girlfriends. And here's where the scary part comes in. These women that they contacted had never made a complaint against him, and what OSI did was tell these women, do you know your husband is a serial rapist? He's raping women around the country, across the world. We need to put this guy behind bars. And then the women replied, they said, you know what, I don't recall him doing anything like that to me. And it took multiple phone calls to the point where they went back to his first wife of 23 years ago, repeatedly told her he's a rapist, made her feel guilty because she's not, quote, supporting rape victims. And then she, all of a sudden, after multiple times of being coached, remembered that there was a few times where he would initiate sexual contact when he was 21 and she was 19. And by the way, he's in his 40s now. And they added that to the charge sheet as a rape. They did the same thing with his other spouses, and they basically coached them and manipulated them into going along with this court-martial. But it's scary when you're facing 2 life sentences and you're at the hands of OSI and these JAG prosecutors will try to do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing, Mike. What we've seen is it's coming out of cell phones. And so oftentimes what will happen is my client, they'll go down to OSI, they'll go down to CID, and of course, what do they always bring with them? They bring their wallet and they bring their cell phone, because everyone carries their cell phone. So I always tell people, if you're getting called to CID, leave your cell phone at home. Take this cell phone, or if you got an iPhone like this, leave it at home. Because what they will do is they'll ask you to put it in the locker. And they'll say, put it in the locker, and they'll give you a key because, of course, that's the only key, right? Wrong. So what they'll do is they will mine the data on the cell phone. And what I have seen, they'll go through your chats, they'll go through your instant messenger, your iMessenger, your Plenty of Fish account, any type of social media app or dating app that you have, and they will find girls that you've dated, find girls that you've met before, ones that you've been online with, and they will actually go out to them and talk to them and say, did you know that the individual that you were in a dating relationship with is a rapist, and he's being charged with rape, and he's going around, we believe he's a serial rapist? Then they say, oh my God, I didn't know that. And they say, this isn't the type of individual we want on the streets. No different than your case, Mike, where they went to ex-wives.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. You know, the scary thing is they will lie to these women. I'm trying to keep next week at Fort Drum that started out as a one alleged victim case. She thought it was just, you know, sexual harassment where they're joking around, and they lied to her and said, you know, there have been multiple other women that made these allegations, and on top of calling every woman that he ever dated or had any relations with, they will lie to you. They will lie to these women. Then when they're like, I don't think anything happened, they say, listen, you might not have thought something happened, but under the law, if you had one drink, or they tell them this nonsense to convince these women to be willing to make a statement, and some of them actually end up on the charge sheet and don't even know they're an actual victim. And they show up in court thinking they're a witness, and they're actually listed as a victim of a rape, for example.
Yeah, and then the scary part, what happens is, taking this to the next logical step, the accused gets charged, he goes down to the ADC's office or to the trial defense counsel's office, and they say, wow, you're facing what amounts to multiple life sentences, hundreds of years in confinement. There are multiple victims. These alleged victims don't know each other. Lightning can't strike twice. Oh my God, you must be guilty. I don't know how to defend you. You better cop a plea. Then what happens is they will go to the prosecutor's office and say, listen, if you drop the charges on victim 1 and 2 or plead them down, we'll plead to victim number 1. And the prosecutor knows that number 2 and number 3 are garbage and that they've been fabricated out of thin air, and they'll take a plea to number 1. And now what they've done is they've leveraged evidence and leveraged a charge sheet in order to get someone to plead guilty, where they're going to be a registered sex offender for the rest of their lives. And so what happens is a lot of the military counsel, not all of them, have no idea this is going on. And even if they did, have no idea how to take a case like this and win it. And so maybe the next piece we can segment into is, Mike, you get a client that calls you and he's got a 2 victim or a 3 victim, or even, as you put it, a 5 victim sexual assault. And I say victim very loosely, okay? They call you and they say, every other lawyer I've talked to said, my case is unwinnable, I can't win, I'm going to prison. What do you say to them to say, yeah, we can win those, and let's talk about trial strategy?
Most of my cases involve multiple victims. And what we're finding is that when you aggressively go after the law enforcement and the people that are behind these allegations being made up, I look at them like legs on a table. You know, you have 4 victims, you have 4 legs on a table. You kick one leg over. Let's say it's a really bogus charge. The prosecution's vouching for these charges. CID, OSI, NCIS are vouching for these victims. And then you kick that leg over. What it does is the government's cases as a whole gets wobbly. You kick the second leg over, you're often going to take down the whole table. If you do it right and you know what you're doing and you're not a coward who just pleads everyone out, you create doubt about the entire investigation. You create doubt about the credibility of the prosecutors who are putting bogus victims and bogus witnesses on the stand. You take these bogus bundled cases, and when you attack it aggressively, you can knock all of the charges out. It actually you use the bogus charges as a weapon against the government. I'm really more concerned if I have a 1 victim, legitimate victim case where it's 1 person, she reports immediately, there's some sort of injuries out there. That's a tough case. But when you have four ex-girlfriends coming out of the woodwork for no reason, they just look shady.
Agreed. The first piece of it is analyzing the case and not having fear. You can't live your life with fear. And as you have all these lawyers out there who say they're trial lawyers, they want to be these heavy hitters, but they're scared to go to trial because they're scared. They're cowards, okay? Because it's easier just to plead their clients out. So you have to take a look at this and analyze this. If you have 5 victims or 4 victims, take each one separately. And how would I try each of an individual case? Then the key is there's always a link. There's always a link. And what you typically find is 1 is linked to 2, 2 is linked to 3, and 3 is linked to 4. Then you start systematically picking off these alleged victims. And as you do that, you flip it in trial and basically flip it on the government and turn that into basically from a shield to a sword and show that law enforcement is basically creating victims out of thin air. And show how weak their charges are. And put law enforcement on trial. And put them on trial for good reason. And what happens is, if you can't trust the messenger, you can't trust the message. And the juries will have instant distrust, and a valid distrust, Mike, a valid distrust of law enforcement, the prosecution, and the entire government's case. And that's what happened in the last couple multi-victim cases I have. Then the government scratching their head said, how the heck did I lose this? And, I let them figure that out.
Tim, it's funny. They try to do that to stack the deck. And the question that the lieutenant colonel in the panel that I just did in voir dire, when we were doing the jury questioning, what were your first impressions when you read the charge sheet? He's not a dummy. He says, I was wondering where these charges came from. One of them is from 1993, and that would look very suspicious. Now, That's something that the prosecutor didn't think. Like, you got a 23-year-old case, all of a sudden they were saying, and then these women reported, and then we brought out that they didn't report. OSI basically harassed them.
But yeah, I think that's a great point. You have to be fearless and you have to attack it. You have to go on the offensive. But I think the bigger issue as we kind of wrap up this episode is that this is happening. It's out there. These cases can be won, but you have to be aware that this is happening. And then how do we stop that at a macro level? And I think the way to stop that is to just continually expose the prosecution and expose NCIS and CID and OSI for these underhanded and dirty tactics in court.
Tim, I completely agree, but they're going to keep coming up with new stuff. And this war on sexual assault is just getting ramped up. We kind of thought we were coming to possibly the beginning of the end. they're now moving into college campuses, and they're doing the same sort of witch hunt technique now against young men in college. And I say this every episode. If you don't have a lawyer that knows what they're doing and that does this all the time and that is fearless, that has tried hundreds of trials, you're screwed for the most part, because you're going to be scared. The numbers, these cases with bundled alleged victims are solely designed to scare and intimidate these inexperienced, and some of them are young, inexperienced attorneys who mean well, but it's scary going into a 5-victim court martial or a 3-victim or a 2-victim. If you're a lawyer who's been doing it for 6 months, it should be scary because your client's facing 2 life sentences.
So if you're watching this, or if you have a case that you're facing where you have 2, 3, 4, 5 victims and you need serious representation, give us a call. We can walk you through it. Or if you're in a position where your military lawyers told you you have to plead guilty because there's no other way around, or you've talked to some other civilians and they all say your case can't be won, if you call Mike, call myself, we'll walk you through it and we'll show you that these cases can be won.
All right, Tim, until next time, good luck with your next case, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.